Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Sussman, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how to set up a timeline in TimelineJS. We're using TimelineJS because it is a really easy to use, beginner-friendly interface, and it allows you to create a timeline using a spreadsheet, and then it will automatically pull from different fields to put your data in order and also show images and text and videos if you choose. So to begin, you need to go to the TimelineJS website. This is linked in that tutorial file that I gave you, that document, or you can also look by just Googling Timeline Night Lab. So they have a timeline essentially like a template that they want you to use. So you can get it by clicking on this main web page. You hit make a timeline and then get the spreadsheet template. I'm going to skip this step just because I've already done this, but essentially you're going to click on the get the spreadsheet template. It'll pop up and it will basically allow you to open it in your Google Drive. You should be doing this in your Brandeis account. And then once you open it up, you are going to be able to make a copy and put it in a certain folder. So I have recommended that you name it timeline, and then you can use this file menu and hit move. And then if you want, you can put it in a certain folder or create a folder within your Google Drive, just so it's organized. This might be a good idea to do, especially since you're doing this for a group or like a class project. So for example, if you're using this to work on your journal projects, then you could put this in your class folder and make a subfolder for your project, and then store all the images and any kind of notes you have in the same folder. So anyways, this is going to be the template that you get from them. You can ignore basically everything below row 4. You won't have that. We'll be adding it. So you're going to have this information here from rows 1 through 4. It will eventually say timeline because you'll name it that. And what this is a special template where the company has basically created a code. So it's created a computer language script. And when you finish your filling out this spreadsheet, the script is going to read through the spreadsheet, and it knows that, for example, when you have something written in the column called year, it knows to put the year in a certain place on the timeline. And then it will know, oh, if someone wrote a headline with that, that headline goes with it, and it knows to match everything up. So it's really important that you keep the first row, these headings, you keep them exactly the same. You don't change them. I would also recommend that on your template, you keep rows 2 through 4 active, like don't delete them until the end. I'll tell you when to do so. But then that way you can have an example of what your data should look like as you're entering it. And also you basically have some wiggle room in case you make a mistake. So the first thing we're going to do is enter the date for your first event. This could be any event in your project. It does not have to be the earliest or the most recent one. The really great thing about this software is that it will end up putting stuff in chronological order for you. So as long as you're keeping your events organized so that each row is one event. So like row 5 will be one event, row 6 is one event. It will then keep that row's information together and then order it in chronological order for you. So you want to go into row 5 and you want to enter a date. And so just pay attention to the way that they are formatting this. So the first part would be the year. So I'm making a timeline about the Ukrainian war. So my first year is going to be in 2022. And then the month is going to be February. And then the day is going to be 24. And now you can enter time. time being the hour, minutes, and seconds that something happened. Some of you might not have that information available to you, depending on how old of a topic you have, or depending just on the nature of the event. That said, if you do have the time, you should think about whether or not it's appropriate for you to include it. Sometimes time is not a really kind of pertinent piece of the information. So for example, if you were looking at making a timeline of when each president was inaugurated in the past 50 years, we probably do have documents saying that, President Biden was inaugurated at this specific hour in the day. And, President Obama was inaugurated at this specific hour in the day. That said, is that hour actually useful and important and necessary for your viewers to know, as opposed to just knowing the year and the month of the day? So just keep that into consideration. So I'm going to skip using the hour because I don't think that specific information is pertinent for this specific event that I'm doing. And the other thing you can keep in mind is that certain events can be more detailed than others. So for example, you can look in their example. For one event, they have it listed as November 1st, 2011. And then the second event, they have it as November 16th, 2011, but then they tell us that it happened at 5:58. So the next kind of 3 columns that you can work in are the end time, the end year. And again, this might not be pertinent for you, so you can skip it. If you are making a timeline that's talking about, certain emperors and when they ruled, then that might make sense, right? So think about like Egyptian pharaohs. They might have a reign for 2 years and some of them might have a reign for 50 years. And so those years make sense. If you're talking about making a timeline of, just specific battles that happened, say in World War II, you might not be able to fix the end of the event at a very specific point in your chronology. And so then it's not really necessary. Also, if you're not talking about the span of an event, so how long it happened for, but just more so when it started, that might not make any sense. So just keep those kinds of questions in mind. And I wrote in the guide on the last page, there's some questions you can go through and ask yourself to kind of make these decisions. The display date, this is a kind of specialized option that is completely optional. And what it'll do is if you do not like the way that the dates are formatted in the timeline, you can use this instead and it will reformat it. So I would recommend that you create your timeline first, see what it looks like, and then start to play with this. So for example, like I could enter all my dates with this information, and then the timeline is going to show it saying, on February 24th, 2022, this happened. But instead, I could override that February 24th, 2022 as appearing on the timeline. It's still going to be using that information to put events in order, but I could say, I don't want you to show that as like the date on the actual text. And instead I want you to write like event number 1, event number 2, event number 3. So again, this is something that I think you should wait and play with afterwards. So moving on, you have your headline and your text. If we look at some of the examples that they have, the Whitney Houston one is actually one that's pretty easy to understand. So on the timeline here, what you're seeing is that Whitney Houston here, that is the title, like the headline, and then this is that descriptive part. Going back to what I was saying about overriding the date, say, for example, they had actually put specific, more specific days here, so that we're looking at the musical heritage event. We're looking at her life right here. So she lived from 1963 to 2012. In their actual like timeline spreadsheet, they might actually say like, Whitney Houston was born on this month in 1963 and she died in this month of 2012. They maybe even put the hour, but just to preserve it in their data. But they use that override option to then say, okay, TimelineJS, I only want you to actually show this. I want to know the month and the year and the hour and everything so that maybe later on I can change my mind and don't have to do that research again. But I'm telling you to put this in. You could put in, like, as your override, like any random word, and it'll put that in instead. But it will always make sure that it's drawing for the ordinal part here on the bottom. It's using the actual like numeric information. So again, headline, my headline is that Russia invades Ukraine. And then your text is going to be that block. And you want to kind of, again, pay attention to how much information you need to include, and making sure that your headline makes sense. And it's projecting the amount of information that you want. So for example, you might look through these examples and have some critiques of them. I do. So for example, a musical heritage is one of the events. I didn't know what that was until I clicked on it, and then it said that she was basically talking about like how she grew up as being part of a musical family. I think that they should have renamed this something else. So again, just kind of pay attention to that. Like the next event is called First Recording. You know what that is. It makes sense. The early years, that phrase makes sense. Early album credits, that makes sense. And then you can click on them and then get more information. So I'll say that Russia invades Ukraine and calls the invasion a special military operation. And you can add as much information as you want. After this part of the text, you have the option then to add media. So you can add a variety of different media types. You can add images. You can also embed video, and you can embed Google Maps. I'm not going to go through every single option with you just because it can get pretty specific depending on what you want. But I did provide this link for you. So if you go to the TimelineJS website, and again, we're in that make a timeline section. If you click here, so you got your template from here. If you click on this right here, make a timeline from a Google spreadsheet. This is kind of like their tutorial, but they have a lot of more detail about the different types of the customizations you can make, and also images and such like that. So if you go down here to media, you can see the different things that you can do. So there's two options. Basically, you can store an image on your Google Drive and get a shareable link. Just like say you made a Google document, you wanted to share it with your professor, do that. And then you put that link in the into the spreadsheet. Or what you can do is you can go on to Google, like go onto a website, and then you can get that image's URL and you put it in. The one downside to TimelineJS is that it does not allow you to basically like upload an entire image file and then it doesn't store it for you. And the reason why that's a downside is because, say, for example, you found an image on CNN.com and then you got that image's URL and then you put the image in as your image link. When CNN eventually like takes that image down, or if they change the URL or do anything like that, TimelineJS doesn't know where that image went. And so it's going to show up as broken. So as much as you can, I would recommend finding images and then saving them to your personal Google Drive. So I'll show you what I mean here. So for example, if I use the one from BBC, I have a few options here. One, I can right click on the image and go to open image in new tab. And that is giving me a custom URL that is specifically just that image. If you're going to do the URL option, this is what you want. And then you copy this URL and then you go into your TimelineJS, and then this column number L or letter L, you copy in that link. And then when the program goes through your template, it's going to say, okay, when I show that particular Russia invades Ukraine event, the image that I should show is this one. But like I said, what if BBC takes this image down? Or what if they move it? That link isn't going to work anymore. So what you should do instead, if you can, is click Save Image As, and then save it. Now, there's a couple little tricks you should know. So I tried to save it. And let me just get into my folder. So I tried to save it and it's defaulting to something called a WEBP file, which is basically like a it's an image for a website. You cannot use that as an option. You want to save these as JPEGs or TIFFs or something like that, something more normal. So a lot of websites like CNN or BBC, they make it a little trickier for you to save these images. So a workaround that you could do is just take a screenshot and then save it as a JPEG that way. So I'm just going to take a screenshot now. I'm using the snip tool. You might have some other option. So I am taking a screenshot. I'm going to save the image. I'm right now just finding the area where I'm storing everything. And like I said, you want to be making a folder that you have everything stored. My Google Drive actually shows up in my like in my computer. So you're looking at my Google Drive right now. So I have a folder for my timeline and I actually have a subfolder for images, just because again, it's good to keep everything organized. So I'm going to call this Ukraine invasion, just so I know what it is. And I saved it as a JPEG. Again, you might not have to do that extra step of the screenshot. Ideally, you won't have to. All you're doing is saving images. You just want to save them as a JPEG and save them on your Google Drive. You want to save them in your Google Drive, not on your actual computer hard drive, because this image needs to be accessible on a cloud, right? So you want it so that your image can be opened from someone else on the internet. So now it's on my Google Drive. So I have to get that URL, that shareable link. So I am going to go to my Google Drive and I'm going to find that image. This one. Okay. So all my all my Ukraine timeline images are saved here. So this is the one we used. So, you want to share it. And, you want to make sure that everybody has access to it. So the next thing you want to do also is get the copy link. So again, this is just like if you were going to share a document with your classmates or with your professor, you want to get that link. So it's copied. So now I'm going to go to the timeline. This is that other demonstration I gave you, and I'm going to put it there. And so again, it's better that it is in something that I am controlling versus just linking right out to BBC or linking right out to CNN. You can do that, but you don't have control over the longevity of that image being on the internet. And then the media credit. So I took this from the BBC, so I'm going to give it credit. The degree of specificity, whether you should be using like a bibliographic MLA citation format, anything like that, you need to ask your faculty member that you're working with. And then a caption. A caption is always really important, especially because these timelines, sometimes the media part can be a little futzy in terms of loading. Like if there's an internet connection issue, the media is usually the last thing to load, but the text is the first thing to show up. So that media caption will allow someone to at least know what that image is if they can't see it, if something happens. Or like, for example, if your link got broken. So we can say that, let's see, what is the civilian photo of the Ukrainian invasion. Again, bear in mind that I'm doing this as a demo, and this is not how detailed you should be on your project. And so that is essentially the basic information that you should do. So you should put a start date at some point, an end date if it is pertinent, the headline, the text, and then insert media. If you go to that web page that I showed you, you have the option to, for example, embed Google Maps. You also can embed YouTube videos. So for example, if we went to Google Maps and searched Ukraine, not Crane, Ukraine. And we wanted to share, click share, and then you can embed it. This is basically a special link that is going to make this entire image show up. So you could actually put this in as an image instead. So for that media option, instead of putting like that BBC image that's in your Google Drive, you put this link in. With Google Maps, you don't have to worry about that whole broken link issue, because Google Maps is a website where how do I say this? Like Ukraine is not a link on Google Drive. Ukraine is not a link on the internet. It's basically Google Maps will know where to go as a result of the URL. So you can copy this in as well. So if you want to show any kind of like geographic information, it might make sense for you to use Google Maps in lieu of finding a map on the internet, like a JPEG of a map. You could use Google Maps instead, because then also it's in more interactive. The person will be able to like pan around on your map. And for those of you who know more about making Google Maps customizable, you can add lines and polygons and things like that onto the actual map and then embed that. And that's something I'm more than willing to help you with if you want. So going back to our template, our timeline, we've added this. There are more bits of information here in the end that are they're optional for you, and you can read about those in that detail. The title, for example, it's a way for you to kind of distinguish certain kinds of hierarchies within your timeline, so they show up a little bit differently. But yeah, just to keep in mind that you can do a little bit of kind of customization here with the background images and such. So in your case, what you're going to do now is just work your way through the different events you have. Again, work row by row. So the next event is going to stick to one row like this, like this. You know how to use the spreadsheet. I myself am going to delete these extra rows because I would put them in to make a little separation for you. But you can see what I did. So this is the one we entered together. And then we have this one right here, the earliest stages of war. This one starts March 2nd. And then this is basically when Russia was actually infiltrating and going into some of the first areas in Ukraine. If you look at my description, I wrote Russia enters a southern city and it continues to inflict damage throughout the country, including a nuclear power plant. World leaders respond, including US sanctions against Russian imports of oil. So I'm basically here like lumping a bunch of stuff that happened within a broad span of time into one event. And you can do that. And the reason why is because here I said that this started on March 2nd, which is when they entered Kherson. And then I said that it ends in March 23rd. So 21 days later, and within 21 days, they'd entered the country. They had invaded certain towns and they had also damaged the nuclear power plant. And then those sanctions happened as well. So when you look at my timeline, it's going to have like a big block of time chunked off. And then all of this stuff is in here. Could I have broken this up and made this to several different events? Yes. Or you can make that big chunk of time. Think about this again, like if you were looking at Egyptian pharaohs, you could say like, Akhenaten entered power on this day, and then he stopped in this day. And within that span of time, he did all this stuff, and all that stuff could be in your text block. Again, it just matters. The specificity and how kind of precise you're being depends on what you are talking about in your project. And then the last event I entered was for March 25th, 2022, when Russia decided to consolidate control over Eastern Ukrainian provinces. So your timelines are going to have a lot more information in them. I just did these 3 events. When you are finished entering, something you should do again is just to delete those first 3 rows that were sample events. So if you just select row 4, for example, and you hit right click and hit delete row, and then it'll go away. And it's moving the information up. So now my first event is in row 4. So just pay attention as you're doing this and make sure you don't accidentally delete your stuff. But now your timeline is just yours. So now what you want to do is you need to make sure that your timeline is viewable by someone else. And you need to basically give another group permission to use it. So this is a really important step, and it's one of the last things you're going to do. It's also something that you only have to do once. So if you go to File, and then you go to Share, and then you are going to, hold on a second, you are going to want to go to Publish to Web. So when you go to Publish to Web, you're going to see a couple options I showed you. And when you do it, you're going to want to hit this published part. This is not going to be grayed out for you because it's already going to have, you won't have done it yet. But this is basically saying that you're giving TimelineJS permission to access your spreadsheet and to basically manipulate it into creating it in another form on the internet. So, and then you have the link, and this is the link to your timeline. You can also get it just by copying and pasting the URL at the top. So you want to copy it, and then we're going to go back to their main TimelineJS website. So, so again, we're going to click Make a Timeline. So this was their information about the spreadsheet. We're going to now scroll down to 2, and it's going to tell you again, you have to share it. This is what we just did, and then publish it. So this is their timeline generator. This is the main tool that we need. So you're going to copy and paste this, your URL here. So I just pasted it. That's the URL to my timeline. And then what you're going to do is just hit enter on your keyboard. And it's going to work for me. There we go. So just to update you, you do your permission. So you share it, you update your publish to web. It's going to give you that link right here. I had copied that one. Don't do that. That apparently is not correct. You're going to copy this one up at the top. The paper documentation tells you to do it this way, this correct way. So you're going to paste that here. And hit enter. And now, so if you look here on the optional settings, if you click show, this is going to give you some options for changing things like the zoom level, how big it's going to look, that kind of thing. You can play around with that. I again recommend that you look at your timeline first and then see what you want to change about it. So we've put this in, we've hit enter on our keyboard. If you zoom all the way down to the page and click preview, you're going to see your timeline. And this is just a preview of it. So you can see here's one of the events we entered, Russia invades Ukraine. Here is another one. And so like I said, again, sometimes the media can take a while to load. And I believe this one I actually copied and pasted the URL and didn't save it to my drive. So you can see why it's important to do that. And then this one, this is showing you a version where, again, I saved that image to my drive, so I have control over it. This one, at some point in the past week, this image was taken down off of the internet. So now the link is broken, so TimelineJS doesn't know where to go to get it. So there's the timeline. So if you want to make any other changes to it, all you have to do is go back to your timeline and add stuff. So for example, I could add another row. Okay, so Ukraine blew up the bridge on the 8th. So I'm going to put the 8th. Ukraine bridge blast. Ukraine blows up a major bridge connecting Russia to Crimea. And so if I hit refresh here, and I go right here and hit that again, it should eventually show it up. Just so you know, this can be a little futzy. It can be a little buggy. So just keep in mind that you might have to sometimes refresh a couple times, but you get the idea. You're going to update your timeline, and then you're going to copy and paste your URL, and then it will show you the update. So, and so also something to keep in mind, like you can give it options like zoom in and zoom out, and it'll do all that for you. So when you go to your step 4 here, there's 2 things. Share your timeline. This link is something that you would use, say, if you wanted to like send it to your professor, send it to your friend. You can put that link in anything. Embed links. These are ones that you would use for specialized purposes. So if you're putting this on like a website and you want the timeline to actually show up as part of the website and not be something that's linking out to it. So for example, like right here, make a timeline from a Google spreadsheet. That's a link. Down here at the bottom, preview embed. See how the timeline is actually kind of showing up as like part of the website. It's stuck on it. That's an embed. So if you have like a WordPress website, a Google site, something like that, you can make it show up there. So that's what you would use here. So just to give you an example of embedding, this is the LibGuide I created that is showing you your TimelineJS instructions. At the very bottom, I embedded my my timeline. And so when you go through it, you'll be able to see it. There's the Eastern provinces, and then say here, Ukraine Bridge Blast, there's one. So if we go back here, and we put another one in, you can say, 2002, today's 10/14, and we'll say war is still going on. And TBD. I'll just save it. I'm going to refresh my web page just so I know. And I'm going to go back to this area, this web page where I've embedded it. I'm going to hit refresh. And now if we scroll through, theoretically, Ukraine Bridge Blast, it will eventually show up here, because it's also, you have to keep in mind that like this link is being fed into TimelineJS, and then they have to have time to update it, but it will eventually show up here. If it's not showing up, if your changes aren't showing up, something I would recommend is just copying and pasting that link over again. So going to step 3, hitting enter. And then looking at your preview, and then it should eventually show up. Be a little patient with it, but just know that it will eventually show up. And if it's not, you might want to just look at your all of your times and just make sure that it is formatted correctly. In my case, I think it's just because the server is a little slow today. But anyways, that is how you would use this. It's pretty straightforward. Just things to remember. Again, just make sure that you are keeping all of your dates straight. So stick to 1 row per event. Make some different decisions, make choices, be kind of critical as to whether or not you should be getting as specific as you are with including times. So for example, in my case, like the bridge blast, that is something that is, we have the very specific hour, minute, and second that it happened. But as to putting an end month, end year, end day, because the actual event of the blast an explosion takes less than a minute, because that is so short, it might not make sense to then say it started on October 8th, 2022, and it ended on October 8th, 2022. See what I mean? Whereas because I clumped all these different events together and called it earliest stages of war, that makes sense that I would have an end date to that. Again, the media, you can use Google, you can embed a Google map, you can embed a YouTube video. So if you go to YouTube, and we search Ukraine war, you need to get the embed link. Some of these are not going to be available, especially ones sometimes from like CNN or BBC, but they will often have a share button here, and then this embed link, and you want to click on that. And then that's what you would add into the Google spreadsheet. So I would click copy, and then I would paste that there. You might find that some media on YouTube does not have that embed option. That's basically them preventing you from sharing it. But when you're doing this, as best you can, especially with photos, I would recommend saving them to your specific Google Drive. Make sure that those photos then are within that folder that has that sharing permission option. And then just keep populating it. Don't worry about going in chronological order. The last page of the guide, it's the one that says here, tips. I've given you a couple of tips for getting through this for your project. So for example, thinking critically about the dates and the times, like I've said a million times, thinking about your heading length. So a descriptive heading, that kind of title, so like first recording, is useful because as someone's scrolling through the timeline on the bottom, like think about this as if you were a history student and you're studying for a test. It probably makes more sense for someone as they're looking at this webpage to be able to see kind of exactly what this is about without having to like actually click in, and also without having to hover their mouse over it. And that again might take some tweaks with kind of playing around with seeing how much space you actually have, but just keep that in mind. That said, you also don't want to be overly descriptive. So I gave you an example just to look at. Some of the examples that are posted on the TimelineJS website, you might not agree with them, you might not disagree with them. The design choices are all of your own. And then finally, if you want to really customize your timeline, you can go back to that TimelineJS website. And if you go to the make a timeline and you scroll to the first part, this make a timeline from a Google Sheet, that is that area where I said where it's essentially, it's their tutorial. It's not super descriptive in terms of just like a step A to step B, but they do give you a lot of detail about specific little tweaks you can make. So for example, using that kind of override option for your dates, how to add really specific types of media. So how to upload like sound files, and using the titles, the eras, and also being able to change the color. That's something that you're going to have to use a little bit of coding for, but if it's something that interests you, that is an option. So all of that is available to you. I would focus on getting the events and getting everything set and just seeing what the timeline looks like. And then from there, start to customize it, because you might find that some customizations you've selected don't look good. They might look good with 5 events, but then when you add 30 events, then it doesn't anymore. So figure out exactly how long you want it to be and then move from there. All right, so hopefully this was helpful. My information is available on that LibGuide, and I am happy to help you, especially with embedding like a Google map, for example. And if you have questions about the citations and such, you should talk to your professor. All right, bye.